The Galaxy Council did not declare war. War required a formal vote, public debate, and legal justification. Councillor Drevin Soth was too clever for that. Instead, he pushed through something quieter and far more dangerous. He called it a peacekeeping intervention. The official claim was simple. The Valorans were harboring illegal human weapons technology on their homeworld. It was a lie, and everyone in the council chamber knew it was a lie. But lies did not need to be true. They only needed to be useful. 9 of the 12 council members voted in favor. 3 voted against. The 3 who objected were ignored. Within hours, the order was sent. A combined fleet of Thyrak warships and Nasari dreadnoughts gathered at the edge of the Athara system. Over 600 vessels, bristling with weapons, their hulls dark against the stars. They did not send a warning. They did not offer terms. They simply dropped out of hyperspace above the Valoran homeworld, like a hammer falling from the sky. The Valorans had a defense fleet, 40 ships. Most of them were light patrol cruisers designed to chase away pirates and escort cargo transports. They were not built for war. But when the Council fleet appeared on their sensors, every single Valoran ship launched immediately. Valoran Admiral Sayla Tan commanded the defense from her flagship, the Luminance. She was old, even by Valoran standards, and she had spent most of her career overseeing peaceful patrols. She had never fired a weapon in anger. But when the enemy fleet filled her tactical display, she did not hesitate. She ordered her ships into formation and opened a distress call on every frequency she could reach. "This is Admiral Sayla Tan of the Valoran Defense Fleet. We are under attack. Our homeworld is under attack. To any ship that can hear this message, we need help. We need help." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. The Luminance was the last to fall. It took hit after hit, burning from bow to stern, and still it held its position between the Council fleet and the planet below. When the final shot tore through its reactor core, the explosion lit up the sky above Athara like a second sun. Then the ground assault began. Thyrak transport ships descended through the atmosphere in waves. Soldiers poured out into the streets of Valoran cities. The Valorans had no army. They had police, medics, and emergency response teams. They tried to talk, they tried to negotiate. They stood in front of the advancing soldiers with their hands raised, speaking calmly, asking what they had done wrong. The Thyrak did not answer. They opened fire. Entire city blocks were leveled. Hospitals were bombed. Schools were reduced to rubble. The Great Archives of Athara, a library that held 10,000 years of Valoran history, science, art, and philosophy, was set ablaze. The fire burned for 3 days. On the surface, Alon Vreth was trying to save as many people as he could. He had been in the capital when the attack began, attending a diplomatic meeting that would never take place. When the first explosions shook the building, he ran into the streets and started pulling people out of the wreckage. He found a group of about 200 civilians, mostly families with children, hiding in the basement of a collapsed community hall. He told them to follow him. He did not know where he was going. He only knew that staying meant dying. They moved through the ruined streets, climbing over rubble, ducking into alleys when Thyrak patrols passed. Alon carried a young child on his back and held the hand of an elderly woman who could barely walk. His silver skin was covered in dust and blood, and his left arm hung at a bad angle where a falling beam had struck him. But he kept moving. He kept talking to the people behind him, telling them it would be all right, telling them to keep going, telling them that help was coming. He did not know if help was coming, but he said it anyway. Aboard the Resolute, Grace Whitfield was the first to pick up the distress signal. She was in the communications bay running a routine check when the signal cut through the static like a knife. She heard Admiral Tan's voice, calm but breaking. She heard the sounds behind it, explosions, screaming, the groan of metal tearing apart. She ran to the bridge. Nathan Cole was already there. He had not left since receiving Elon's warning 3 days ago. He stood at the central console, his face tight, his hands gripping the railing. Grace played the distress signal over the bridge speakers, and every officer on deck went silent. Then a second signal came through. This one was from the surface. Elon's voice, thin and strained, broadcasting on an open channel. They are killing everyone. The soldiers are in the streets. They are shooting into crowds. The archives are burning. The hospitals are gone. If anyone can hear me, please, please come. There are children here. There are so many children. Nathan closed his eyes. The bridge was silent, except for the sound of Elon's voice and the distant rumble of destruction behind it. Grace stood beside him. She did not speak. Tears ran down her face, but her jaw was set and her hands were steady. Nathan opened his eyes and looked at his communications officer. "Get me Admiral Hale on a priority channel, now." The officer's hands shook as he worked the console. "Sir, Earth Command is not responding. All priority channels are jammed with traffic. The Parliament has called an emergency session." Nathan felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew what that meant. The politicians were talking, and while they talked, people were dying. He stood there for a long time, listening to the open channel from Athara. One by one, the transmissions went silent. Patrol ships, gone. Ground stations, gone. Emergency beacons, gone. The voices disappeared, swallowed by static, until only one remained. Elon's voice came through one last time. It was quiet now, barely a whisper. The sounds of battle had faded behind him, replaced by an awful silence that was somehow worse. "Nathan," he said. He was not broadcasting to the fleet anymore. He was talking to his friend. "Nathan, if you can hear me, do not forget us. Do not let them erase what we were. Promise me." The channel went dead. Nathan stood perfectly still. The bridge crew watched him, waiting, barely breathing. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. "Nathan," she said softly. He did not answer. He stared at the tactical display, where the Athara system was now marked with a single red icon. Enemy occupied. Somewhere down in the ship, a young ensign who had been listening to the broadcast sat down on the floor of the corridor and put his head in his hands. In the engine room, a senior technician who had served alongside Valoran medics for 10 years slammed her fist against the bulkhead and swore under her breath. In the mess hall, a group of Marines sat in silence, their food untouched, staring at nothing. The Resolute drifted through the dark, and the silence on the bridge was the loudest thing Nathan Cole had ever heard. He finally spoke. His voice was low, rough, and very steady. "Grace, call a meeting of all ship commanders. 1 hour. What are you going to tell them?" He looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was something older and harder than both. "I am going to ask them a question," he said, "and I think I already know the answer." The news hit Earth like a shockwave. It started with the military channels, then spread to the civilian networks within minutes. By the time the sun rose over the Atlantic, every screen on the planet was showing the same footage. Valoran cities in ruins, smoke rising from a burning world, refugee ships tumbling through space with their engines failing and their hulls cracked open. The numbers were still coming in, but the early estimates said 2 million Valorans were dead. 2 million. And the number was climbing. People reacted the way people always do when something terrible happens to someone they care about. Some wept. Some raged. Some stood in shock, unable to process what they were seeing. But underneath all of it, there was something else. Something that had been sleeping inside humanity for a very long time. It was fury. Quiet, cold, and deep. The Valorans had helped humanity when no one else would. During the Kellis Plague of 2471, when a disease swept through Earth's outer colonies and killed tens of thousands, the Galaxy Council had done nothing. Some Council species had actually blocked human ships from entering their space, afraid of contamination. But the Valorans came. They sent medical ships, research teams, and supplies. They worked alongside human doctors for 2 years. They saved 3 million lives. People remembered that. They remembered it in their bones. On Earth, the United Parliament held an emergency session. The chamber was packed. Every senator was present, along with military advisors, intelligence officials, and the Secretary General himself. The gallery above was filled with journalists, their cameras recording every word. Admiral Patricia Hale stood at the central podium. She was 63 years old, with short gray hair and a face that could have been carved from stone. She had spent her entire career in the Earth Defense Fleet, rising through the ranks on nothing but skill and stubbornness. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She told the Parliament exactly what had happened. She gave them the numbers, the timeline, the fleet composition of the enemy. She told them that the Valoran homeworld was occupied, that the Valoran defense fleet had been destroyed, and that the Galaxy Council had officially declared the operation lawful. Then she stopped talking and waited. The argument that followed was loud and bitter. Senator Carl Weber was the first to speak against action. He was a tall, thin man with careful eyes and a cautious voice. He reminded the Parliament that the Galaxy Council commanded thousands of warships. He reminded them that Earth's fleet was a fraction of that size. He reminded them that if they struck at the Council, they would be painting a target on every human world in the galaxy. "We cannot save the Valorans by destroying ourselves," he said. "I grieve for them. We all grieve for them. But grief is not a strategy." Senator Diana Vaughn stood up before he had even finished sitting down. She was a short woman with a sharp tongue and no patience for caution. She pointed at the screens around the chamber, which were still showing images from Aethara. "You want to talk about strategy?" she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the chamber. "Those people saved our children. They came to us when we were dying, and they did not ask what it would cost them. They did not calculate the risk. They simply came. And now they are being slaughtered, and you want to sit here and do math." The chamber erupted. Senators shouted over each other. The Secretary General banged his gavel and called for order. No one listened. While the politicians fought, Nathan Cole sat in his ready room aboard the Resolute and made the hardest decision of his life. He had been trying to reach Earth Command for hours. The channels were overloaded. Every message he sent came back with the same response: "Stand by, await orders, do not engage." He stared at those words on his screen until they lost all meaning. Do not engage. 2 million people were dead, and someone behind a desk was telling him to stand by. He thought about Elon's last words, "Do not forget us." He thought about Grace, who had not spoken since the transmissions went silent. She sat in the corner of the bridge, staring at the deck, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like someone who had lost a piece of herself and did not know how to get it back. He thought about the crew of the Resolute and the crews of the 46 other ships in his fleet, people who had signed up to defend humanity, not to sit in the dark and listen to an entire civilization die. Nathan stood up, walked to the bridge, and opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Commander Nathan Cole. I am speaking to every ship in the 2nd Expeditionary Group." He paused. He could feel the weight of every ear listening. "You all heard what happened at Aethara. You heard the calls for help. You heard them go silent. I am not going to repeat what you already know. I am going to tell you what I intend to do." He took a breath. "I am taking the Resolute to Aethara. I am going to break the Council blockade, and I am going to get our people out. Valoran survivors, human personnel, anyone who is still alive on that world, I am going to bring them home." The channel was silent. 47 ships, thousands of crew members, all listening. I am not ordering anyone to follow me. This is not a sanctioned mission. Earth has not given authorization. If we go and we fail, we will be disavowed. If we go and we succeed, we may still face charges. I am asking for volunteers. Nothing more. He released the transmit button and waited. Grace had come to the bridge. She stood beside him, her eyes red but her back straight. She looked at him and gave a single small nod. The first response came in less than 30 seconds. It was Commander Danny Marsh, aboard the destroyer Ironclad. Danny was a stocky man from Ohio, with a thick accent, and a reputation for being absolutely fearless in a fight. His message was 2 words long. Right behind you. The second response came from Lieutenant Kara Bishop, aboard the tactical frigate Steadfast. Kara was the fleet's best analyst, a quiet woman who saw patterns in data, the way a musician hears melodies in noise. She sent a full tactical brief, along with her response, 3 possible approach vectors to the Athara system already calculated. Steadfast is with you. Here is how we get in. After that, the responses came in a flood. Every ship, every captain, every crew. 47 ships, all volunteering. Nathan read the messages as they came in, one after another, and he felt something crack open inside his chest. He had been ready to go alone. He had been ready to take the Resolute into that system by itself and fight until there was nothing left. But he was not alone. He had never been alone. Grace put her hand on his arm. "They are all coming," she said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like it might be hope. Back on Earth, Admiral Hale watched the situation unfold from Fleet Command. She had been fighting with the Parliament for hours, trying to get authorization and getting nowhere. Someone on one of the ships had broadcast it on an open civilian channel, and within minutes, it was everywhere. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. People marched in the streets of every major city on Earth. They held signs with Valoran words on them. They chanted the names of the dead. They stood outside Parliament and demanded action. The vote came at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. It was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Parliament authorized military action in support of the Valoran people. Admiral Hale sent a single encrypted message to Nathan Cole. It contained 5 words. "You have authorization. Bring them home." Nathan read the message, closed his eyes for a moment, and then looked at Grace. "Set the fleet to combat stations," he said. "Plot a hyperspace course to Athara. All ships." Grace turned to the helm officer. "You heard the commander." The Resolute shuddered as its engines powered up. Across the fleet, 46 other ships did the same. Running lights flickered to red. Weapon systems came online. Crews moved to their stations with purpose in their steps and fire in their eyes. The second expeditionary group entered hyperspace at 0347 hours, burning hard toward Athara. 47 ships against 600. No one on those ships thought about the odds. They thought about the Valorans who had come to save them during the plague, asking nothing in return. They thought about Elon Vret's last whispered words. They thought about the simple, ancient idea that when your friends are in trouble, you go. You go no matter what. And that is exactly what they did. The second expeditionary group dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Athara system at 0612 hours, and they came in fighting. There was no announcement, no hail, no demand for surrender. Nathan Cole had decided during the transit that words were finished. The time for talking had ended when the Thyrak opened fire on unarmed civilians. Now there was only the work that needed to be done. The Council fleet was spread across the system in a wide defensive net. 600 ships, mostly Thyrak warships with a contingent of Nasari dreadnoughts holding the outer perimeter. They were positioned for occupation, not for battle. They had expected protests, diplomatic messages, maybe sanctions, They had not expected 47 human warships screaming out of hyperspace with their weapons already hot. Nathan's plan was simple, because simple plans survive contact with the enemy. 3 waves. First wave hits the communication relays and supply ships. Second wave punches through the weakened perimeter. Third wave makes for the planet and establishes a landing zone for evacuation. The first wave was led by Kara Bishop aboard the Steadfast. Her job was not to destroy ships. Her job was to blind them. The Steadfast and 4 electronic warfare frigates surged ahead of the main fleet and began flooding the Thyrak sensor networks with false signatures, ghost contacts, and corrupted targeting data. Within minutes, the Thyrak fleet could not tell how many human ships they were facing. Their displays showed 200 contacts, then 50, then 500. Captains screamed at their sensor operators. Operators screamed back that the systems were compromised. While the Thyrak were blind, Commander Danny Marsh brought the Ironclad and a wolf pack of 6 destroyers straight into the heart of the enemy formation. The Thyrak ships were bigger, they were more heavily armored, but they were slow, and they fought the way they had always fought, in rigid formations, following predetermined patterns, expecting their enemies to do the same. The humans did not fight like that. Danny Marsh fought like a street brawler. His destroyers moved in tight, unpredictable groups, darting between the larger Thyrak vessels, hitting them from angles they did not expect, then pulling back before the enemy could return fire. They used the Thyrak ship's own bulk against them, slipping into blind spots, firing at point-blank range, and vanishing into the chaos before the Thyrak gunners could track them. The Thyrak had never seen anything like it. Their tactical doctrine was built on overwhelming force and rigid discipline. They did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to hold still. On the bridge of the Resolute, Nathan watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. Green icons for his ships, red icons for the enemy. Far too many. But the green ones were moving fast, weaving through the red like threads through fabric. And wherever they passed, red icons flickered and died. Grace Whitfield was below decks in the Combat Information Center, coordinating damage reports, rerouting power, and keeping the fleet's formation from collapsing. She worked with a focus that bordered on mechanical, her voice steady on the comm, giving orders, receiving updates, adjusting plans in real time. She did not allow herself to think about what was happening on the surface of Aethara. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, she had a job to do. The battle was brutal from the start. The destroyer Hammerfall was the first ship lost. A Thyrak energy lance caught it broadside as it was turning to cover the Ironclad's flank. The beam cut through the ship from port to stern. The Hammerfall broke in 2, and both halves tumbled into the dark, trailing fire and atmosphere. There were no escape pods. Nathan felt each loss like a punch to the chest, but he did not flinch. He could not afford to. The moment he hesitated, people would die. More people. Ironclad, adjust heading to 035. Fill the gap left by Hammerfall. Steadfast, keep their sensors down. I need another 2 minutes of confusion. Danny Marsh's voice came back, rough and breathless. Copy that. Moving to fill. They are getting angry, Nathan. Good. Angry people make mistakes. The frigate Clearwater went dark 20 minutes into the fight. A reactor breach, triggered by a near miss from a Nisari torpedo. The ship lost power and began to drift, its crew scrambling for emergency suits in the darkness. 2 nearby frigates moved in to cover it and pull survivors off before the hull collapsed. 9 ships. Nathan lost 9 ships in the first 2 hours. Each one had a name. Each one had a crew. Each crew member had a face, a family, a story. Nathan knew he would carry those names for the rest of his life. But he could not stop now. The turning point came when Nathan decided to do something that no sane commander would do. The Thyrak flagship, Dominion's Wrath, sat at the center of the enemy formation, surrounded by a screen of escort cruisers. It was the nerve center of the entire Council fleet. Every order, every coordination signal, every tactical update flowed through that ship. If it went down, the fleet would lose its brain. Nathan ordered the Resolute forward, straight at the flagship, straight through the escort screen. Grace's voice came over the internal comm, sharp with alarm. "Nathan, that escort screen will tear us apart." "I know," he said, "but if we take out their command ship, they fall apart. It is the only way." There was a pause. Then Grace said, "Understood," rerouting all available power to forward shields and weapons. "You have everything I can give you." The Resolute surged forward. The escort cruisers opened fire immediately. Energy beams and kinetic rounds hammered the carrier's forward sections. Armor plating buckled and tore. Fires broke out on 3 decks. A secondary weapons battery was destroyed. The port side of the ship was ripped open, exposing corridors to vacuum. Nathan gripped the railing on the bridge as the ship shook around him. Ceiling panels fell. Sparks showered from overhead conduits. An officer was thrown from his chair and did not get up. But the Resolute kept moving. It crashed through the escort screen like a fist through glass, taking terrible damage but never slowing down. When it emerged on the other side, battered and burning, the Dominion's wrath was right in front of it. Close. Too close for the Thyrak flagship to bring its main weapons to bear. "All forward batteries," Nathan said, his voice steady as iron. "Fire." The Resolute unleashed everything it had. At that range, every shot hit. The broadside tore into the Dominion's Wrath engine section, which was unshielded at close range. Explosions rippled across the flagship's hull. Its engines sputtered, flared, and died. The great ship began to drift, powerless, dark. The effect on the Council fleet was immediate. Without the flagship coordinating them, the Thyrak ships began to lose cohesion. Orders stopped coming. Formations broke apart. Ships that had been fighting in disciplined groups began acting independently, getting in each other's way, firing wildly. The Nasari saw the chaos and made their choice. They had never wanted this fight. They had joined the operation because the Council told them to, and now the Council's flagship was a dead hulk spinning in the void. The Nasari dreadnoughts turned and withdrew, their engines flaring blue as they made for the edge of the system. The Thyrak fought on for another hour, but their heart was gone. Ship by ship, they began to pull back. Some retreated in order. Others simply ran. By the time the last Council ship left the system, the space around Athara was filled with wreckage. Human and alien, twisted together, drifting in silence. On the surface, the Thyrak ground forces lost contact with their fleet and began to panic. Without orbital support, without reinforcements, they were alone on a hostile world, surrounded by a population that had every reason to hate them. Some units surrendered. Others tried to fight their way to their transport ships, only to find that the transports had already fled. Valoran resistance cells, small groups of survivors who had been hiding in the ruins. They were not fighters, but they knew their world. Every tunnel, every basement, every hidden path. They guided human marine teams through the wreckage to Thyrak positions. The ground operation was over in hours. Elon Vreth was found alive. He was in the basement of a collapsed building, surrounded by nearly 300 Valoran civilians he had kept alive for days. He was barely conscious, his left arm broken, his silver skin gray with exhaustion and dust. When a human marine pulled the rubble away and light poured into the basement, Elon looked up and said in a voice like dry paper, "You came." The marine, a young woman from Texas, whose name Elon would never forget, knelt beside him and said, "Of course we came." Above them, the sky over Athara was clear for the first time in days. The fire still burned across the surface, and the air was thick with ash and grief. but the enemy was gone. Nathan stood on the shattered bridge of the Resolute. Half the consoles were dark. The viewport was cracked. He could see stars through a hole in the ceiling that should not have been there. His ship was broken, but it was alive. Like him. Grace's voice came over the comm, tired but steady. Landing zones are secure. Evacuation has begun. Nathan closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. "Copy that," he said. "Get them all out. Every last one." The guns fell silent over Aethera, but the work was far from over. In the days that followed the battle, Earth's fleet worked without rest. Transports flew between the surface and the orbiting carriers in endless rotations, carrying the wounded, the starving, the orphaned, and the broken. Over 800,000 Valoran survivors were pulled from the ruins of their homeworld. Some walked onto the transports on their own. Many had to be carried. Some were so small they fit in a Marine's arms. Nathan Cole did not sleep for 4 days. He stood on the bridge of his ruined ship and directed the evacuation like a man possessed. Every time someone told him to rest, he shook his head and asked for the next status report. Grace Whitfield worked beside him, her voice hoarse from hours on the comm, dark circles under her eyes, running on nothing but duty and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The Resolute was barely holding together. Its port side was open to space, sealed off by emergency bulkheads. 3 of its engine pods were dead. Its weapons were dry. But its hangars still worked, and its medical bays were full, and that was all that mattered. When the last transport lifted off from Aethera's surface, Grace leaned against the wall of the Combat Information Center and closed her eyes. A young officer asked her if she was all right. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, "No, but we did what we came to do." The fleet limped home. They arrived at Earth to a reception that none of them expected. Every orbital station was lit up. Civilian ships had gathered along the approach lane, hundreds of them, their running lights blinking in a pattern that the crew of the Resolute slowly recognized. It was an old naval tradition, one that went back centuries on Earth's oceans. A salute of lights. A welcome home for those who had sailed into danger and come back. Nathan stood at the cracked viewport of his bridge and watched the lights blink around him. Danny Marsh called in from the ironclad, his voice rough. "You seein' this, Nathan?" "I see it. I think they are happy we are back." Nathan almost smiled. Almost. The Valoran survivors were taken in without hesitation. Human colony worlds opened their doors, one after another. On the agricultural world of New Canterbury, families cleared rooms in their homes and helped Valoran refugees settle in. Human farmers taught Valoran families how to work the alien soil, and Valoran botanists taught the humans things about plant biology that they had never imagined. On the orbital station Haven's Rest, human doctors and Valoran healers worked side by side, treating wounds that were both physical and invisible. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy. There were language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, moments of frustration and grief that spilled over into anger. But underneath all of it, there was a stubborn, quiet kindness that refused to give up. Humans and Valorans had been through something terrible together, and that shared pain became a foundation that neither side would let crumble. The Galaxy Council, meanwhile, was falling apart. The Battle of Aethera had sent shockwaves through the galactic political order. 3 member species, the Lutheni, the Orvani, and the Pelari, formally withdrew from the Council within weeks, citing the massacre as a violation of every principle the Council claimed to stand for. Several other species quietly sent back-channel messages to Earth, assuring humanity that they had no intention of supporting retaliation. Councillor Drevin Soth was furious. He demanded an emergency session. He pounded his fist on the chamber table and called for a full declaration of war against Earth. He called humans savages, animals, a plague on the galaxy. He ranted for over an hour. The chamber listened in silence. When he finished, no one seconded his motion. Not one species, not one voice. The war he wanted never came. Within a year, Soth was removed from his seat on the council. The official reason was a procedural violation, some minor rule about term limits that had never been enforced before. Everyone knew the real reason. He had gambled everything on breaking the human Valoran alliance, and he had lost. The Thyrak Dominion's influence within the council collapsed, and Soth spent his remaining years in obscurity, bitter and forgotten. Admiral Patricia Hale traveled to the council station at Galathus Prime to deliver Earth's formal response. She wore her dress uniform, pressed and perfect, with every medal she had earned over 40 years of service. She carried no weapons. She brought no threats. She stood in the center of the council chamber, surrounded by representatives of species that were older than human civilization, and she spoke plainly. She did not talk about strategy or politics or power. She talked about what she had seen in the reports from Aethara. She talked about the mass graves. She talked about the burned hospitals. She talked about a Valoran child who had been found wandering alone through the ruins of the capital, calling for parents who would never answer. "We did not come to the stars to make enemies," she said. "We came because we were curious. We came because we wanted to see what was out there. And what we found, more often than not, was cruelty dressed up as order. We found powerful species, crushing weaker ones and calling it law. We found a galaxy that rewards silence and punishes compassion." She paused and looked around the chamber. "Earth will not be silent. Not now, not ever. If standing with our friends makes us your enemy, then so be it. But know this, we will always come. Whenever innocents are in danger, whenever someone calls for help, we will come. And no fleet, no council, and no empire will stop us." She turned and walked out. No one followed her. No one spoke. The council did not apologize. They never did. But the galaxy heard what Hale said, and something shifted. Not overnight, not loudly, but slowly, carefully. Species that had spent centuries keeping their heads down began to look toward Earth. Ambassadors arrived. Trade offers were made. Research partnerships were proposed. Not because these species suddenly loved humanity, but because they had seen something they had not seen in a very long time. They had seen someone stand up. Nathan Cole returned to Earth and was offered a promotion to Admiral. He turned it down. He said he was a ship captain, not a desk officer, and he meant it. He spent the next several months visiting the families of every crew member lost in the battle. He went to their homes. He sat at their tables. He shook their hands and looked them in the eyes and told them that their sons and daughters, their husbands and wives, had made a difference, that they had mattered. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the battle, harder than the decision to go. But he owed it to them, and Nathan Cole always paid his debts. Grace Whitfield resigned from active duty 6 months after the battle. She told Nathan over a quiet dinner at a small restaurant near the Fleet Academy. He was not surprised. He had seen it coming. "I am going back to Aethara," she said. "They need help rebuilding, not just buildings, everything. Their records, their history, their sense of who they are. The archives are gone, Nathan. 10,000 years, burned to ash. But the people who lived that history are still alive. Their memories are still there. Someone needs to help them write it all down again." Nathan nodded. "Elon? He has already asked me to come. He is leading the reconstruction effort. They elected him, if you can believe that, a diplomat turned leader. He says he doesn't know what he's doing." She smiled faintly. "I told him that's how every good leader starts." Danny Marsh was promoted to captain and given command of a new destroyer, the EDF Vigilant. He accepted the promotion with a grin and a handshake, and immediately requested assignment to the patrol route nearest Valoran space. He said he wanted to keep an eye on things. Everyone knew what he really meant. Kara Bishop was offered a position at the Fleet Academy as an instructor in tactical analysis. Her first class had 60 students. By the end of the semester, every one of them could run an electronic warfare operation in their sleep. She was quiet in person, but relentless in the classroom, and her students both feared and adored her. Elon Vreth stood on the steps of what had once been the great archives of Aethera. The building was gone. Only the foundation remained, blackened stone and melted metal. But around it, construction crews were already at work. Human engineers and Valoran builders working side by side, laying new foundations on top of the old. Grace Whitfield stood beside him, a datapad in her hand, recording the memories of an elderly Valoran woman who had once been a librarian in the archives. The woman spoke slowly, her voice fragile but clear, recounting a poem she had memorized as a child. Grace typed every word. "We will not get it all back," Elon said quietly, watching the construction. "No," Grace agreed, "but we will get enough. And what we build will be ours. Yours and ours together." Elon looked at her. For the first time since the invasion, something like peace crossed his face. The story ends where it began. Nathan Cole stood on the observation deck of Lunar Station Bravo, the same deck where he had stood as a boy, watching the first Valoran ship arrive. The station had been rebuilt since then, expanded and modernized, but this deck had been preserved exactly as it was. A plaque on the wall marked the date of first contact. A new Valoran cruiser was approaching the dock. It was the first one built since the massacre, constructed in a joint shipyard with human help, crewed by Valoran volunteers. Its hull was silver, catching the light of Earth's moon, just as that first ship had done 34 years ago. Its name was painted on the bow, in both Valoran script and English. Enduring Grace. Nathan watched it glide into port, smooth and sure, and for the first time in a very long time, he smiled. Behind him the stars stretched out in every direction, vast and cold and indifferent. The galaxy did not care about loyalty, or friendship, or sacrifice. The galaxy was just space, empty and endless. But the people who lived in it were not empty. They were not endless. They were small, and brief, and fragile, and that was exactly what made them extraordinary. Because despite everything, despite the cruelty and the darkness and the terrible mathematics of power, they kept choosing to care. They kept choosing to show up. They kept choosing each other. And that, in the end, was the most human thing of all. The year was 2497, and humanity had been walking among the stars for just over 100 years. It had not been an easy century. The Galaxy Council, a ruling body made up of 12 ancient alien species, had never liked humans. They saw them as loud, short-lived creatures who bred too fast and asked too many questions. Earth was tolerated, but never respected. Humans were given the worst trade deals, the most barren colony worlds, and the coldest shoulders at every diplomatic gathering. But there was one species that saw things differently, the Valorans. They were tall, silver-skinned people with deep violet eyes and soft voices. They were not warriors. They were scientists, healers, and diplomats. They had been part of the galactic community for thousands of years, and in all that time, they had never started a war. When humanity first stumbled onto the galactic stage, confused and overwhelmed, the Valorans were the only ones who reached out with open hands. Nathan Cole remembered the day it all began for him. He was 12 years old, standing on the observation deck of Lunar Station Bravo with his father. A Valoran cruiser had come gliding into the dock, smooth and silver, catching the light of Earth's moon like a mirror. His father had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Those are the good ones, son. Remember that." Nathan never forgot. Now he was 46, a commander in the Earth Defense Fleet, and he stood on the bridge of the EDF carrier Resolute. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his face carried the lines of a man who had spent too many years staring into the black. But his eyes were still sharp, and his voice still carried the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without being told to. His second-in-command was Lieutenant Commander Grace Whitfield. She was younger than Nathan by 10 years. With dark brown hair she kept tied back, and a calm manner that hid a fierce temper. Grace had spent 4 years living on the Valoran homeworld of Ithara as a cultural liaison. She had learned their language, shared their meals, attended the bonding ceremonies of their families. She loved them. Not in the abstract way that politicians talked about alliances and partnerships. She loved them the way a person loves a second home. Together, Nathan and Grace commanded the 2nd Expeditionary Group, a fleet of 47 ships stationed near the border of Valoran space. It was supposed to be a quiet posting. The Valorans were peaceful. Their corner of the galaxy was calm. Nothing ever happened out here. But something had been building for a long time, and Nathan could feel it. The Galaxy Council had grown more hostile toward the Human-Valoran alliance with every passing year. The elder species did not like what they saw. Humans and Valorans were building joint research stations. Human engineers maintained Valoran agricultural worlds. Valoran medics served aboard human ships. The two species were becoming intertwined in ways that made the Council nervous. At the center of the growing hatred was Councillor Drevin Soth of the Thyrak Dominion. The Thyrak were a reptilian species, cold-blooded in every sense of the word. Soth was old, even by Thyrak standards, and he had spent decades building his influence within the Council. He was patient, calculating, and utterly without mercy. To him, the Human-Valoran alliance was not just an annoyance, and diseases had to be cut out. Soth had been whispering in ears for years. He told the other council members that the humans were arming the Valorans. He told them that the alliance was a first step toward a human empire that would swallow the galaxy. He told them that if they did not act now, it would be too late. Most of it was lies. All of it was fear, and fear, as Soth knew very well, was the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. Nathan did not know the details of what was happening inside the council chambers. He was a soldier, not a politician. But he had a friend who did know, a Valoran diplomat named Elon Vreth. Elon was one of the first Valorans Nathan had ever met personally. They had been introduced 20 years ago at a joint ceremony on Ithara, and they had become close in the way that only two honest men can. They did not always agree, but they always respected each other. Elon had a dry sense of humor that surprised most humans, and Nathan had a bluntness that surprised most Valorans. They balanced each other out. Over the past few months, Elon's messages had changed. They had become shorter, more careful. He stopped making jokes. He stopped asking about Nathan's crew or his ship. Instead, he asked strange questions. He asked whether the Resolute was fully supplied. He asked how quickly the 2nd Expeditionary Group could mobilize. He asked these things casually, as if they were small talk, but Nathan knew Elon well enough to hear the worry underneath. Grace noticed it too. One evening, sitting in Nathan's ready room with cups of cold coffee between them, she said what they were both thinking. "He is scared, Nathan. I have never known Elon to be scared." Nathan nodded slowly. "I know. What do we do?" And we wait. They did not have to wait long. 3 days later, in the dead of the night cycle, the Resolute's communication officer woke Nathan with an urgent alert. A coded transmission had come in on a private Valoran diplomatic channel. It was from Elon Vreth. Nathan sat up in his bunk and read the message on his personal terminal. The encryption was heavy. the kind used only for the most sensitive communications. When the message finally decoded, it was short. Just 3 words. They are coming. Nathan stared at the screen for a long time. The ship hummed around him, quiet and steady, the way it always did in the deep hours. Somewhere below, the crew slept. Somewhere out in the black, 46 other ships drifted alongside the Resolute, their crews dreaming of home. He reached for his comm unit and called Grace. She answered on the second tone, her voice alert. She had not been sleeping either. "Grace," he said quietly, "get to the bridge. Wake the senior staff." There was a pause. Then she asked, "How bad?" Nathan looked at the 3 words on his screen one more time. "Bad enough," he said. "Get everyone up, now." He set down the comm unit, pulled on his uniform, and walked out into the corridor. The lights were dim, the way they always were during the night cycle. His boots made no sound on the deck plating. He moved through the ship like a ghost, and with every step, he felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders. He did not know exactly what Elon meant. He did not know who was coming, or how many, or when. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The peace was over, and whatever came next, he would not run from it.